Okay, so I mean, we here because we want to talk about uncomfortable conversations, and in all transparency, you have no idea what I'm about to say,
None at all.
right? But I think that's what I like about the platform you setting up. Like unscripted, we just gonna have these talks, and this one would be more relevant.
That's the watch.
It's all good.
Go. I'm just gonna turn my watch off.
And you don't have to actually stop too. You just keep going.
Yeah.
So this conversation would be very relevant to those that know us or know of us and have been kind of tracking our journey, especially within the last year. And so you asked me off camera, what do we want to talk about? And I said, I don't know. And you said, well, what uncomfortable conversation? So my mind goes to, when was there an uncomfortable moment between you and I? Right. And so I'm gonna go to I'm just gonna go to the night that, what I'm saying, that we lost Nanah, right? And the uncomfortable conversation for me that night, and those who don't know, Nanah is my brother's daughter who lost her life last year. Actually was murdered. Let's just say what it is. And we're out there on the street with all this happening. And if anyone's ever been to a crime scene, right? Like, just to paint the picture, like we're on MacArthur. It's the middle of the night, and it's cold, and I am watching my brother try to manage this situation. And my uncomfortable conversation is trying to get you to leave and not stay to watch them remove her body from the street. And it took me a minute to figure out how to say that to you in a very vulnerable time where I risk you probably flashing on me because I'm asking something very big of you to do. And that was very uncomfortable.
Okay.
I told you didn't know what I was going to say.
No, I didn't know what you was gonna say. I didn't know you was going there.
I told you I was going to, man.
But if I remember correctly, like I didn't leave immediately. I asked for, like, I think that was one of the times when we both recognized that it was time for a immediate compromise. So it wasn't just like a big brother moment. It was calculated, right? It was calculated, and it took me a minute. It took me a minute to let my emotions process that night and understand what you were saying and how you were saying it. But even in that moment, I was still able to, like, for the most part, keep my composure. I believe I broke down maybe once or twice, and I still understood the assignment, sort of, kind of. But watching or seeing your child laid out after you just talked to her, like, so within 24 hours, like, we had a beautiful conversation, and then it created a possibility and it created hope in both of us, and then that was kind of like shattered. So it was a lot of emotions going on that night. I had a few good men around me, you know what I mean? A few people showed up for me. I had a few people show up that I didn't care to talk to.
Right.
But at the end of the day, I would say that although it was a very uncomfortable conversation, I was still able to process it slower than you probably would have liked.
No.
But I was able to process it and leave before the removal.
And I want to say though, so if we're talking about uncomfortable conversations, I want to put this into context and unpack it. You definitely handled that, right? The best that anyone could expect in that situation. And that comes from the work we had been doing prior to that,
Yeah,
right? Because as a brotherhood, as siblings, and anybody who has siblings, you don't always see eye to eye, right? And it
no,
takes time. It takes intentional dialogue to get to the space so that when I did say that to you that night, you were able to receive it better than if it happened 5 years prior and we hadn't been
correct,
doing the work, right?
correct.
So I want to, because what the goal here is to say, so for me, before I said, I know I needed you to get out of there, because I didn't believe for you as your brother that you needed to have that visual in your mind and your heart. It was already difficult for us. I start so situational awareness, right? I started realizing that the night was turning into early morning. So fatigue would start to kick in. All of these people now, as the word is getting out, here comes the cavalry of people, mostly spectators, right, who want to come and be nosy. But then there's always this element of here comes the candles and the weed smoking and the loud music. And somehow, sometimes in a culture, we lose sight of like what actually happened. We go into the solitary mode. And knowing you, I knew that would be a trigger. It would only take for the wrong person to be out of alignment with the sign, right? Out of, alignment with our energy that could set you off. So I was trying to protect you, but I had to be calculated on how I approached it. And I'm very thankful, right, that entering into that uncomfortable, because I'm talking from my perspective, it was a uncomfortable conversation for me. But because I'm intentional about how I delivered it, what I said, when I said it, you're intentional about hearing what I said, why I'm saying it. You knew that you wasn't quite ready, but you were willing to get ready. And that is how that uncomfortable conversation didn't blow up, right? And we learn to appreciate it on the other side, because I believed where you needed to be was at home with your wife, where you could let it all out, and you acquiesced to it, and you said to me, you said, okay, bro, after you thought about it, you took what we like to call, you took that purposeful pause. You took that purposeful pause and you said, okay, bro, but I just need a little bit more time. And then you did that, right? So, that would be that's the first uncomfortable conversation that came to mind when you asked the question. And I think it's just important to share that I went deep and hard your first episode. I think people need to know, because there's a people who not going to know you. They need to
Yeah,
know. That's just one,
yeah, that's
right?
just
That's
one.
one of many of our uncomfortable conversations in life. But like, even in the midst of the tragedy of Nanah, my niece, your daughter, the passing of our mother within the last month, right? We still, and we've been having to have uncomfortable conversations across the
Uh,
family dynamics,
Across the board.
across the board with each other. And there is a way that you go about uncomfortable conversations to try to get them comfortable. So let's talk about that. Like, what's your approach to an uncomfortable conversation? Just think about anyone that you have to have. Is there any type of approach? What's your thought process when you have to enter into an uncomfortable conversation?
So for me, the best approach to an uncomfortable conversation is I actually get curious. Like I actually begin to ask questions to get the person I'm talking to open up. And it's like a leading question, but it's a so I'll take like me and my daughter Michelle. We've been having some really uncomfortable conversations later, and me and little Darrin. And I lead with getting their perspective of whatever I did. So it lets them know that they're being heard, and it lets them know that their view matters, and then they're willing to open up and have a conversation with me. So for the most part, I try to lead with a question. How like how did you feel? How did this make you feel when I did this? So it opens up and it lets them begin with their feelings. And so we know that 90% of the feelings ain't facts. You know what I mean? So, but we also got to understand, that sometimes when people are talking to me, it's not exactly what I did, it's how they perceived what I did. So, yeah, and I just take it at face value and I go from there. But I don't try to combat or deny or like change their narrative. I build off their narrative, and then so
if I'm hearing you correctly, your strategy, one of them, is to enter into this uncomfortable conversation with curiosity.
correct.
You're going to be curious. You're going to be curious,
Curious.
right?
Yeah.
But curious about what? Because there's different.
It all
different
depends.
conversations.
It all depends on the situation. Like each situation is differently. Like so, like if I'm talking to one of my children, it's definitely gonna be about parenting, right? Or if I'm talking to a coworker and they do something crazy, and I'm like, "What's your thought process behind that? Like, what made you think that was okay?" And then it's probably something that they grew up doing, and then you'd be like, "Nah, that's not how I operate." So and here's the funny thing: a lot of conversations don't have to be uncomfortable. Now, it's a lot of uncomfortable conversations that need to be had, but it's like the word narcissist, right? Just overly used, and I don't want to start overly using it or using it out of context. And so it's just certain conversations are uncomfortable, but in some conversations, people make uncomfortable because they don't want to talk about them.
Yeah, most definitely. It's definitely within.
It's definitely within. Yeah,
Right?
yeah, yeah,
With
yeah.
definitely make situations bigger than they need to be. It's a story we tell ourselves, and so for your first episode, I think that being able to understand that uncomfortable conversations are real. One of your strategies is to be curious about the conversation that you're needing to have. I like to say, to add to that, I like to choose curiosity over conflict, right? So I'm not looking for conflict in this conversation. I'm
Yeah.
looking to be curious on the elements of this conversation. And so that's a good takeaway for those that are wondering, what could you take away from you have a pending uncomfortable conversation that you need to have. Approach it with curiosity, right? Is what we're sharing with you. And then I would say from my end, a tip is that I want to be very mindful of what I like to call your emotional biases. And there are a few emotional biases, but there's two, but the one that really seems to create a lot of conflict is projection bias, right?
Okay.
And if anybody ever thinks about it, if they're honest, the only reason why you ever really get bothered with somebody is because your inner roommate and you goes, "Why did you just say that? Why did you do that?" Right?
Yeah.
Like you are challenging what they did. But what is really happening is that you are saying to yourself, that's not how you would do it, right? If I say something you don't like and it bothers you, it's because that's not how you would have said it.
True.
If I do something that you don't like, it's because that's not how you would have done it. But when you practice emotional intelligence, when you practice stress management, you realize that you're projecting out because that's not the way that you would do it. But it doesn't make it right. It doesn't mean that their way that they're doing is not the
Yeah, I got a video about that.
Yeah, so I would say when you go into a uncomfortable conversation, be mindful of your emotional biases, particularly projection bias, and you'll know when you're projecting because you'll feel a conflict within the action that someone else has taken. And the way that I neutralize my projection bias, instead of being bothered about what the person said or what they did, I ask myself this $1,000,000 question. Why does it even bother me in the first place? And you are now watching Uncomfortable Conversations with Mr. Darrin Bedford, the stress-free, the kickback cat.
This episode has been hijacked by Mr. D.B. Bedford.
You're absolutely right.
And that's the big brother, little brother dynamic that I've been dealing with kind of like my whole life, so I'm used to it.
That's all we love, man. That's all we love.
As always, have a blessed and stress-free day because you deserve it. We love y'all. Peace.